Okay, so let me start. So as I mentioned before, it's the EPICAP project, upscaling the European platform of integrating communities. The aim of the project is to improve the integration and inclusion of migrants in local communities. So what we decided to do is to develop participatory approaches and co-design services through multi-actor communities. So that was very, very important for us from the start to involve as many stakeholders as possible in order to make services adapted to the local needs. We have actually created communities of practice in all countries, members of the consortium. And what we try to do, and I can say that so far it has worked very, very well and very successful. We foster collaboration between migrants, organizations led by migrants, public authorities, and civil society groups. So we have already started working together. We've been sharing experiences, ideas, and we try to create solutions for local challenges, adapted to local challenges that will be centered to the final users. So that is the general aim of our project. It is an AMIF project that started more than a year ago on May 2024, and it will be active until the end of April 2027. We are 12 partners and 13 associated partners. You can see the 12 partners here. And as I mentioned before, we've been creating our COPs in every country participating in the consortium. So we have the COP, a COP here in Greece, in Italy, in Spain, in Bulgaria, and in Germany and Poland, sorry. Just very, very few words about our communities of practice. As I said, for us, it's very important to create collaborative environments. So we have been trying to bring together actors from a very wide range in order to increase the knowledge and the experiences shared among us. The first priority was to identify local needs for integration in each space, in each territory, and then to start fostering knowledge through peer-to-peer learning and capacity building trainings, and also by co-designing and piloting new integration strategies. We're actually getting there now. We're very happy and excited. So apart from the communities of practice, the project is mapping good practices in concerning local integration strategies. We have identified specific local needs and also challenges for the development of integration services. As I mentioned before, we have been implementing capacity building programs to enhance and improve migrants' involvement in designing these integration policies. As I said before, from the COPs and throughout the project, migrants participate in every step. And of course, the ultimate and where we come here today is the production of policy recommendations, policy briefs and recommendations in order to try and make migration policies and migration initiatives future-proofed. And of course, we will be testing in practice the 6 migrant services locally, which are going to be produced by the 6 COPs. So coming to our policy lab today, as I mentioned, one of the aims of our project is future-proofing migration policies. And how are we planning to do so? With local strategies that take under consideration the local context and the needs that we have been identifying since almost the beginning of the project. And at the same time, we need to take under account and into consideration the fact that migration, it's not a local phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon. It is influenced and affected by external factors, wars, conflicts, politics, of course, and any changes happening in a governmental level, and of course, natural hazards. So what we have identified as the main three topics to work on and study on and have desk research on are emergency mechanisms, which is the policy lab today that we are going to be talking about. And then the second topic will be about the urban and rural linkages in migrants integration, and the third one about migration narratives. So the way we've been working on it is desk research and consultations with key stakeholders and policymakers. Then we're holding and organizing the policy labs where we will be sharing experiences. We have 3 speakers, very experienced in this sector, and they will be able to present and talk about their own sector. And of course, this will lead to the policy briefs and policy recommendations in the end, when we will be able to conclude and put together all the results from the previous 2 phases. So as I promised, it was a very, very short presentation. I don't know if you have any questions before we continue. Again, I'm very happy to have you all with us. We were all excited to see people registering for the Policy Lab, and seeing people that are interested in the topic and that they want to participate and share their experiences. If there are no comments, if you have no questions, we can continue with our schedule. And now I have my very, very good colleague and experienced Miss Georgia Alexandrou, who is a researcher and trainer in KMOP, in the organization where I work as well, Social Action and Innovation Center. And she will share with us the state of the art about emergency mechanisms, and which actually are the insights from the research that has been done within the framework of EPICA project so far. So, Georgia?
Thank you, Eleni. Let me share my screen first. I have prepared also a short presentation, and actually there is this particular case here in this topic actually that we realize that we cannot finalize it very easily, because all of the situations that you described and all the changes that are happening also at the policy level, but also through other social and political circumstances. So although we have already started this process of reading, reviewing, and discussing also with experts, it's an ongoing process that we cannot finalize it without changes, even last-minute changes. So, hi everyone, thank you again that you are here. We know that it's pretty early in some countries. I'm really glad that we have so many people here joining because we recognize the value of such topic. Today I will share some of the main results and the common, let's say, challenges and gaps that we have identified through our research. And of course, I would like again to highlight that this is an ongoing process, and we will publish, and you will have the opportunity to read the report and with all the details in the next months. Starting with something very important, I think to everyone, the definition. What definition we used when we tried to map the emergency mechanisms in Europe. So we used the definition that you can see on the screen, So emergency mechanisms are these provisional measures in the event of EU member states being confronted with an emergency situation characterized by a sudden inflow of third country nationals, including a distribution mechanisms for asylum seekers in a clear need of international protection to ensure a fair and balanced participation of all EU member states. We also recognize two types of member state emergency responses, which are the preventative action plans, which should be operationalized when particular pressure on a member state asylum system or there are problems in its functioning may jeopardize the application of the Dublin regulation, while a second type is the crisis management action plans, which should be implemented if the first plans, the preventative action plans, do not solve the problem. Examples of emergency action should include housing solutions, access to employment, language courses, recognition of certificates, resettlement regulations, which have been established as a response to the refugee affairs. We started this research in 2025, in March of 2025. As I said, it's an ongoing process. So today we will present you the results that actually we have analyzed and compiled by August 2025. We used, as Eleni explained, a twofold methodology. First, we reviewed all the existing literature, relevant projects, previous projects, ongoing projects, and current policies in both EU and national level. When we say in this project national level, we mean in Bulgaria, Germany, Greece, Italy, Poland, and Spain, because these are the partner countries that participate in this project. And once this review was finalized, it was very important to us to discuss with experts, to discuss with policymakers that will give us a more realistic insight of these documents, because we didn't want to rely mostly on what is said on paper, but also to explore the reality of the implementation of these policies. So eventually we have 5 consultations, private one-to-one consultations, and we expect to have more in the future for the next topics that we will explore throughout the year. What we identified as immediate response tools are the rapid deployed grants that are managed by DG Home and DG Eco, which enable a swift mobilization of funds and staff within hours, not weeks. It was actually a statement by one of our experts who described these policies. These grants are for the immediate crisis action, and the comment also by expert was that sometimes this rapid and this quick action may bypass standard transparent procedures. That was actually one of the comments. Legal frameworks that we identified was the Temporary Protection Directive that was activated during the Ukraine war, the Ukraine crisis in 2024, which provided immediate residence rights, employment access, schooling, and social services to displaced persons. Although it was mentioned that this temporary nature limited the long-term integration and plan in general. Another tool and framework that we also deployed in our research was the integrated political crisis response, a high-level political coordination that enables the coordination among the EU Commission, the Council of Europe, and the member states, the EU member states, during major crises as described. Of course, it was pretty clear to us that we couldn't ignore a major change and a major event sorry, in the migration field, which is the new EU Pact on Migration and Asylum, which has as an objective, as a goal, to establish a more efficient and resilient EU-wide approach to managing migration and asylum, having at its core a balanced solidarity between the member states and the shared responsibility for managing migration. It was adopted back in June 2024. According to the pact, the member states have 2 years to fully implement these new rules and regulations, and it is expected to reach the full application by June 2024. It replaces previous ad hoc systems. It is a very optimistic set of rules, a pact of rules covering the entire migration process. This is actually what we read from the pact. It's not our comments, but what is written in the pact. And it is built on 4 key policy areas: secure external borders, fast and efficient procedures, effective solidarity and responsibility, as it was said before, and international partnerships. Of course, it's not the goal of this policy lab to dedicate our focus on the new pact. It is very interesting for you to read more, to discuss more about what is written and what can actually happen. And I'm sure that the speakers today, the rest of the speakers, will explain more what is happening in this field. But of course, as I said, we couldn't ignore this new state of the art here today. What was really important, however, to us was to identify and try to group, to analyze the main gaps and challenges that are common in the countries, in the partner countries. And these challenges were identified also in the literature review and the reports that we read, but also they were commented by the experts that we discussed. So one very common characteristic and actually challenge in national level was the political tension between the regional and the national authorities, which often delay all the emergency responses and relocation efforts. We had an example from Spain and the relocation of unaccompanied minors. And this may be a possible reason, and actual reason, due to the bypassing transparent procedures. A common topic among the experts was actually what is written on paper and what is actually happening. So we realized that there is a disconnect between the EU planning and the local implementation, because we realized that when the emergency plans are written at Brussels level, they often fail to translate these plans, these measures, these rules into local action because of staffing, housing shortages, and capacity gaps, leaving very often the host communities unprepared to coordinate all the integrational process. Housing crisis was a common challenge that was identified in Europe, and this crisis couldn't be disconnected from the migration and the refugee affairs. The experts indicated that the housing shortages across several EU countries restrict resettlement options and the autonomous integration of refugees. We also realized that there is not such a tendency in long-term integration of migrants and refugees. Rather, the immediate response and covering the immediate humanitarian needs of people on the move, which restricts the overall social cohesion and the long-term integration of migrants, which, as I say here, undermines the sustainable migrant inclusion. Another topic that we identified was that political disputes, unclear responsibility, even insufficient training among local authorities tend to hamper the national plans despite the existing legal frameworks. That means that even if there are legal frameworks and strong legal frameworks and the rules and the regulations, in many countries there are political issues. There is this vague picture of responsibilities where local authorities do not know where their role finishes, and most of the staff that are integrated in the services may not be trained in integrational practices and on how to handle the migration issues and challenges that derive from this situation. And we realized that this EU readiness and political will vary. With crisis, we saw it during the war in Ukraine, where there was this rapid or more rapid activation of political and legal frameworks, while we saw in previous and current actually crises that there are less coordinated responses to situations such as the displacements in Palestine or Lebanon. What we learned throughout this process, and we wanted to share it here with you today, is that the effective response is determined less by the quality of the EU plans and more by the political will and the multi-level governance. Internal political tensions between national and the regional authorities tend to derail the implementation of such plans, and we saw it also in the relocations, for example, and inconsistencies in different crises. Also, we saw that there is this fundamental disconnect, as we explained, between the EU-level strategic planning and the local execution. And these Brussels paper plans fail due to a lack of ground-level capacity, including critical shortages in housing, staff, training, leaving communities unsupported, the host communities unsupported. Housing was one of the main issues and one of the main lessons learned here. It's not just an issue, it's a central structural bottleneck. It tends to make the resilience efforts and attempts more difficult, and without grounded support, it prevents autonomous integration of the very same migrants and refugees, and exposes the lack of a long-term planning within the emergency mechanisms. We also saw that there is a stark contrast between rapid, well-resourced response for some groups and slower responses for others, highlighting a systemic selectivity in certain nationalities, populations, and crises. And this inconsistency undermines the principle of solidarity that also the very same pact wants to highlight and brings as a new age in migration field, and reveals that emergencies are often politically and not just operationally defined. We also learned that successful coordination is hindered by unclear responsibility allocation and insufficient local authority. And without clear mandates, adequate resources, and empowered local actors, that's why this project, the EPICA project, is very specific and very important to the local communities. Even if we don't focus on local actors and if we don't empower the local authorities, even the most robust plans are likely to fail. I promise that this is the last slide, but it's very important for us to share with you what we learned. We learned that in all 6 partner countries we undergone this research, we talk about rapid response, but there are funding gaps, legal loopholes, and uneven municipal capacity. So these challenges show that most plans are paper tigers when arrivals spike. Rapid mechanisms rely on multiple agencies, but these agencies often operate in silos and causing delays. We have examples from Bulgaria, we have examples from Germany, Italy, Greece. I'm also Greek, so I have to say this for my national context. And we see that this situation indicates that emergency preparedness it's not just having a plan. It requires sustained investment in people, infrastructure, and interagency communication. Otherwise, we have seen it before, systems crumble under pressure. We have recognized and we have identified the role of non-governmental organizations, but we also saw that these organizations often fill critical gaps left by governments without formal authority or guaranteed funding. And in this case, they are vulnerable to political shift, proving that heavy reliance on NGOs shows governments' limited capacity or willingness to handle crisis fully. It also risks to create a temporary fragile system that may collapse under political or financial pressure. And in some cases, in some countries, we are at this stage right now, where limited funding and political swifts lead many non-governmental organizations that were in the front line to limit their budget. Many NGOs are now closing, they stop their services. So we see that these partners were treated, as I say here, as stopgaps and not equal partners in these integrational attempts. We also saw that legal frameworks designed to manage migration can be repurposed to limit the rights than to protect people. Emergency powers and temporary laws sometimes bypass due process. We had an example from Poland with the suspension of asylum procedures. We have this case also here in Greece with the temporary suspension of the asylum processes for 3 months. This is the initial plan. We will see in the future. But we see that how law can be used to exclude migrants and refugees and not to work in their favor. And last but unfortunately not least, we saw that declaring emergencies has become in many countries a normalizing policy, a policy tool that, rather than a temporary measure, allowing many governments to act quickly, but at the cost of democratic oversight, transparency, and fairness. For example, in Greece and in Italy, repeated migration emergencies are treated as a routine, fostering a governance model that relies on exceptional emergencies and exceptional laws. Treating emergency measures as the new normal can weaken public trust, of course, can limit oversight from parliament and courts, and can consolidate policies that put border control above human rights, making these exceptions eventually feel like the new normal, the new reality. Of course, I know that you may have many comments. You may have also experience from all these situations. We will be very happy to discuss it also later on in the group activity that we have prepared. But I'm stop sharing, and thank you very much for your time and for your focus on this.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you so much for your insightful contribution. A lot of information shared, a lot of information and data to think of. So I think we're ready to pass on to our guest speakers. We're very happy to have with us three speakers that will share during this policy lab their approaches, their key challenges that they have seen in their experience. And I'm very happy to introduce to you Mr. Nikos Alexiou, who is working as a consultant to the Greek Ministry of Migration and Asylum, and he's a monitoring and evaluation expert. And he will present I'm waiting very much to see what he has to say. The title of his presentation is From Unpreparedness to Ultra Conformity. How the one-size-fits-all European mandates hinder anti-fragility. So very interesting. Feel free also during Nikos's presentation to share if you have any comments, any questions in the chat, and we will be able, after he finishes, to address a few. So Nikos, thank you for being with us once more.
Great. Thank you, Laura, and thank you everyone for inviting me here. So first of all, I would try to share the presentation. Yes. Okay. I hope that you see what I'm saying, which is the presentation itself.
It's okay, yeah. No
Okay.
worries.
Great. So yes, as Laura already mentioned, I'm a professional with almost 9 years in the migration field now. I am working as a consultant with UNICEF Greece to the Ministry of Migration and Asylum. But I would like, of course, to do the disclaimer that all the views that are going to be expressed here are 100% my own. And of course, they do not reflect the positions of UNICEF Greece, nor of the Greek government and the Ministry of Migration and Asylum. So thank you a lot, first of all, to Georgia as well, because the presentation was very interesting, and I found a lot of very interesting points that connect 100% with what I'm about to say. So the title of the presentation illustrates that we're going to talk about the overall tendency of the European Union to create what? To create universal rules, which is primarily, let's say, a good thing, but how this might not be such a great idea after all when it comes with and clashes with the reality. So, as the title says, yes, we're moving from an unpreparedness to maybe an ultra conformity. But I worry that this one-size-fits-all European mandate will hinder the anti-fragility of the European and the national systems. So let's be more specific. So what we have is the new EU Pact, of course, in migration and asylum, as Georgia already mentioned. It aims to create uniform and universal, actually, European rules for everything, actually, for reception, for asylum, and for emergency response as well. Of course, this is framed as a solution, first of all, to the chaos of 2015, with millions of refugees and asylum seekers, primarily from Syria, that came to Europe. With a very difficult situations in Greece, in Northern Macedonia, in Germany, etc. But of course, I think that it's also framed as a solution for the political crisis all around Europe concerning the disorderliness that we see as pertaining to the illegal migration. So in attempting, however, to fix, let's say, this chaos, to put some order into this chaos, and to fix this unpreparedness, I believe that maybe the pact risks going too far toward ultra-conformity and rigidity of the system. So as you have already understood, I take a contrarian, let's say, view. I'm very influenced, specifically for the context of anti-fragility from the work of Nassim Nicholas Taleb, which is a Lebanese writer, that explains that anti-fragility is actually that systems grow stronger from shocks and not by avoiding them. And of course, I will explain more about this notion and about the whole ideas going forward. So what lessons did we take from 2015? First of all, it was that we were unprepared. There was a huge migration crisis and the EU states largely improvised. There was, of course, weak coordination. There was unequal burden sharing with, as I mentioned earlier, Greece, Northern Macedonia, and in my understanding, of course, Germany, because they have the great majority of the people arriving there, have a very high responsibility. And that resulted, of course, as well to ad hoc emergency camps with terrible living conditions for everyone there. For example, in Idomeni, which was in the border between Greece and Northern Macedonia. And for a number of years, not only during 2015, in Lesbos, in Moria camp. So the EU response is what? Is that we must never be so unprepared again. We have to be more prepared. And the whole philosophy behind the European Pact is that of the ability to predict, to pre-plan, to harmonize, and to create universal rules. The problem is that migration flows are inherently unpredictable. The danger, so in general, is to be able to prepare greatly in a great way for the last war, for the past, but not for the next one, not for the future. So we see this trend from unpreparedness to ultra-conformity. The pact enforces very, very quickly standardized border screening with fixed timelines, uniform asylum procedures across all the member states, and solidarity mechanisms about relocation, about emergency, about financial contribution. So this whole system, let's say, what assumes is a certain amount of stability and predictability of everything. But the crisis that we face, and this is inherent in the nature of the system, they are never identical. They are never the same now as they were in the past, and they will never be the same in the future as well. So 2015 was not Ukraine 2022. It's not Sudan displacement that we saw in 2023 and we see again now. And another great example that I can tell you from my professional personal experience is the fact that currently in Greece, 62% of the minors, of the unaccompanied minors, they have Egypt as a country of origin, which is something amazing because 2 years ago, we had almost no Egyptian unaccompanied minors in Greece at all. They were below 2 or 3%. Since then, in Egypt, there is not a war, there is not a civil conflict. So if someone was able to predict in 2022, 2023 that nowadays 62% of of the population would be from a specific country of origin, Egypt would never be in those predictions. Egypt is, of course, again treated as a safe country of origin from the Greek Asylum Service, So you can understand that this creates a lot of issues that were unthinkable only a couple of years ago. So what I'm saying is that a rigid system in general may fail to adjust when an emergency comes. For example, in the EU Pact, there are contingency plans that call for two scenarios from each country. Let's say the worst case is maybe that those countries have encountered in the past. What is really, really common, not only as regards to migration, but in everything when you're talking about worst case scenarios, is that when you mention them, you forget that when this worst case scenario happened, it was not the worst case scenario. It exceeded the worst case scenario of the time. So at best, you prepare for something that has already happened in the past without taking into account that in the future, it will be worse because it will be the next worst case scenario. So we will have, let's say, the comparison between the two notions, between fragility and anti-fragility. And fragile systems, what they do is that they are optimized. They're not systems that are built in the sand, let's say. They are optimized, and the EU Pact, for example, it is optimized. They have a great degree of sophistication, but they are optimized for only one scenario. And when there are unexpected shocks, and migration is by definition full of unexpected shocks, they break, and they rely on central-only control. Whereas, for example, the anti-fragile systems, what they do is that they try to benefit from variation. They allow local improvisation. And this was already mentioned by my colleague Georgia about the local empowerment. Okay? And what they were trying to do is that they try to evolve actually under stress. So the EU Pact risks fragility because it discourages, in a great way, local adaptation and improvisation. I will give again the example of what I know best, so Greece today. Reception, asylum, and even integration systems are almost 100% dependent on EU financial and human resources. Because, in case you don't know, because we're talking also about colleagues from other countries, EUAA, for example, provides a lot of human resources to the Greek authorities. So as long as Brussels funds everything, funds projects through AMIF, through DG Home, of course, where all the NGOs are subcontracted, things do function, to the level that they do function. Sometimes great, sometimes not that great, but they do function. But if those resources are delayed, or maybe I should say when those are delayed, and when they are reduced, or when they will be politically withdrawn, the entire system collapses overnight because the fragility is built in the system, because there is no redundancy, there is not an alternative, there is no local fallback capacity, and there is almost no room for local adaptation. It is true that the European Pact has some space, let's say, for the national authorities to take initiatives, but this margin is not that big. I will try to connect this with the notion of integration in an emergency that was mentioned in earlier presentations, let's say, and titles of the topic today, which is, for me, integration in an emergency. It's an oxymoron. It reminded me actually of a poem from Frank O'Hara, which was titled "Meditations in an Emergency," because how can you meditate during an emergency? And here as well, how can you integrate in an emergency? So let's be more precise. So the pact increasingly emphasizes what? Integration starting at the emergency stage, with language courses, with housing, schooling right at the arrival, etc. And on paper, this looks efficient. Of course, it is humane, it comes from a very good place, and also it is structured. However, integration is a very, very complex system. And complex systems, they cannot be fixed with pre-packaged formulas, according to me at least. The quick universal interventions, such as those from the EU, they create hidden fragilities. So they look like progress. We are all happy that we created the EU Pact. It was a work that was going on for several years. And people in Brussels, I know for a fact that they were elated when this happened. But they fail when the context shifts. And the context always shifts. So, for example, in this specific point, if Greece builds integration structures entirely on EU-funded emergency integration schemes, you know what happens when the flows drop, or the funds dry up, or the political winds shift. And again, it's not by coincidence that I say that political winds, they are winds because they do shift, because they change all the time unpredictably. So nothing is there when this happens, because everything is seen as a European and not a national responsibility. When the next crisis, when the next, let's say, emergency happens, oh, this is not our problem mainly because it's a European problem. It's a European responsibility. So there is no ownership of the structures from the national states, and even more from the local authorities, that they are the ones closer to reality, they are closer to the problems, but there is no ownership of the structures, so they cannot adapt. They are not used to adapting. So the system is left hollow when this happens, unable to sustain itself, and an emergency can easily become a permanent fragility. Especially in the topic of integration, this is very problematic, because integration is not a plug-and-play emergency fix. I think that all of us can agree, maybe. If someone disagrees, let me know. It will be very interesting. That it's a long-term adaptive process, and it thrives on local trial, error, and feedback from the bottom up. So 3 warnings. First of all, this is again an overview of the EU. Is not only as regards to integration or emergency response. It's the physics envy. It's that the EU in general tries to design neat formulas, but for complex, messy human problems. So the compliance with uniform procedures replaces the resilience and the robustness that comes from something else. I think that instead we should try and use the inversion principle. So instead of what maybe is an ideal system in theory and on paper, we should maybe ask more what collapses worst in practice. And the answer is a system that depends on one central source of funding and rigid formulas. The third warning is concerning the false precision. I think I already mentioned it, that in Greece, nothing pertaining to reception, asylum, or integration, nothing can survive without external injections from Brussels. So there is no robustness and there is no skin in the game. Everything is not seen as a responsibility of the local authorities. The national authorities have limited, again, responsibility, because everything is seen as this is a European problem. Europe should create a common, let's say, policy for everything, and then we will implement it. This is false precision. It looks great on paper, but in reality, it breaks. So what I have in mind, what I propose, because it's not, of course, useful to just complain. I think that we should move ideally towards an anti-fragile EU approach, and instead of a rigid centralization, we should more focus on the following. First of all, decentralized experimentation. European guidelines, yes, and overall structures, yes, but let the states and the cities and the local authorities to try models adapted to their local contexts. Redundancy. So we have to create multiple safety nets on an EU level, yes, but also on the national, on the local, and of course, in collaboration with the civil society. So one failure doesn't collapse the whole system. Optionality. And this is also a matter of democracy, but this is another conversation, that solidarity should not be a one-size-fits-all system. Flexibility actually increases the resilience of a system. Lastly, we should underline the need for skin in the game, that local and national actors must co-fund always, at least, and co-own solutions, and not rely solely on Brussels and Malta. Ideally, in an ideal world, in my view, the EU's role is to provide rules, is to provide clarity, funding, and coordination, but not impose ultra-conformity and micromanagement. So overall, as a closing remarks, let's say, is that what I would like you to remember from this presentation is that migration is volatile by nature. There can be no universal formula that can anticipate crisis and emergency situations. Because in every system, the odds of rare events are not computable. You cannot predict a rare event. The EU Pact risks turning the system from unprepared to fragile through overconformity of the member states to its policies. That for at least for countries such as Greece, the dependence on the EU resources shows how fragility is being designed into the system, and this is very dangerous. And that integration during emergencies cannot be reduced to a quick fix, and it must be adaptive, long term, in order, maybe, hopefully, to become anti-fragile.
Wow, Nico, thank you very much. A lot of food for thought. Thank you so much for all the effort put into preparing this presentation and, of course, your views and experience. To me as well, hidden fragilities was very important aspect that needs to be taken under consideration. And of course, the lack of predictability. As you said, that none, let's say, emergency situation is the same as the previous one or the next one. I don't know if we have any questions in the chat or if somebody would like to make a comment. I can read some of the comments from Athanasia. Thank you for saying things as they are, especially appreciated given your sensitive position, very appreciated, and your suggestions. Local and national authorities, I guess, must take responsibility, but also the necessary resources. Thank you for your recommendations. Great presentation. I don't know if anyone, before we continue, if anyone would like to ask Nico something, if you would like to make any other comments. Nikos, will you be able to stay with us, or you need to go? Because we will be more than happy to have you in the next session as well.
For the next hour at least, yes, for sure.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, so we can continue to our second speaker today. I'm very happy to have with us today Mr. Efthimis Adonopoulos. He is a policy and advocacy lead at Victim Support Europe. And he will be with us today with his presentation about building inclusive emergency systems and addressing the needs of migrant victims of crime. Efthymi, thank you so much again for being with us. I'm very happy to see you, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. And thank you for this opportunity to join you here in this policy lab. I'm really happy that I see familiar faces, but also familiar names in the group chat, in the chat, because some people are kind of hesitant of switching on their cameras, but it's fine. Hello from Brussels. Let me share my screen with the presentation.
Efthymi, do you prefer me to share it for you so that you can...
No, it's fine, Laura.
Okay,
It's okay. I will manage. I think it's a nice opportunity for me to learn how to as well. So, yeah, there we go. So, can I test something if...
We can see the slides changing, if that's what you want to check.
Okay. Also, so it's, let's say from slide, so you now see the title, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah, maybe
Okay.
that means you can put it in presentation mode, so it will be bigger.
From the
Below on the
beginning.
right.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of ways to go through that. Either down to
No,
the...
Laura, it's okay. In order not to lose time, can you do it? Sorry, I'm not...
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No worries. You have to stop sharing.
Yeah.
And no worries, I will do it. Is it okay for everyone? And can you see me changing the slides?
Yes.
Perfect.
We do.
So, as you can see, the title of this presentation is Building Inclusive Emergency Systems and How to Address the Needs of Migrant Victims of Crime. I will try to frame a little bit the issue in times of crisis. How we respond to the needs of the most vulnerable reveals not only the strength of our emergency systems, but also our commitment to justice, dignity, and inclusion. And with this presentation, due to my role here in the organization also, and the focus of the organization, because we're working on behalf of all victims of crime, no matter what the crime is, no matter who the victim is, I would like to focus on a group that is often overlooked in the emergency preparedness and integration efforts, with the so-called group of migrant victims of crime. And the second slide, I have put on a short story, a real case study from one of our partner organizations, Surendra. I will not read it out loud. I will give you the time in order to see how an event, a traumatic event, can affect the integration process of vulnerable migrant, and in that case, a child. And in very soon after you finish reading it, I will move on to the next slide number 3. So these individuals are not only navigating displacement and uncertainty, but they're also surviving direct harm, often in silence, alone, at the closed doors of a house, with their family, without specific type of support. They may be fleeing war, trafficking, violence, or any type of exploitation, only to face more abuse in places meant to be safe for them. And I'm sure that since I'm talking to practitioners that have been around after 2015 or in previous crises in the past, that you have seen these titles as safe spaces, safe zones, to be at the end unsafe for all the migrant victims. So addressing their needs is not just a humanitarian gesture, but is the test of our system's resilience, fairness, and humanity. And these are the things that I want to stress out a lot, that a system, in order to be effective and ready to respond to the emergency type of any situation, needs to have resilience and to be fair, to be victim-centric, and to have the humanity in order to respond to these challenges. Migrant victims of crime, therefore, as you already know, include individuals who have the experience of human trafficking, sexual or gender-based violence, labor exploitation, hate crime or xenophobic violence, domestic abuse, which is often worsened by the insecure resident status. Sometimes, or most of the times, there is an overlapping between all these aspects, and you may have a victim of sexual and gender-based violence to be also labor exploited. So yeah, in emergencies then, be it conflict, natural disasters, pandemics, or economic collapse, these risks do not disappear. In fact, they grow. And migrants often do not know the rights, which is one of the important things that is enshrined in many directives, in many EU legislative frameworks, and the right to information. So they don't know the rights. They may be also afraid of being detained or deported, and they may not speak the language. And I'm going to give an example coming from the human trafficking area, that what we have seen right now is that due to fear or due to lack of trust to institutions, sometimes the victims are afraid and are scared of reporting that they have been trafficked or the whole situation that they are into. A crisis, therefore, does not erase the crime, it amplifies it. And too often our systems, as Nikos mentioned, and it has been something that I really appreciated in the presentation before, systems are not equipped, are very fragile, fragmented, or the systems and the people that make the systems. And yes, I live in Brussels. I have had the experience of negotiations during the pact, but also seeing the negotiations now with the EU Victims' Rights Directive, how things are going. People sometimes are not willing to change the system and to respond to the challenges inclusively. At this stage, I want also to briefly share the story of I'll give a fictional name. I will give the name of Amina, a woman who has led a conflict in her home country and has arrived in Europe with her young son. She was placed in a temporary accommodation where she was later sexually assaulted by a staff member. When she tried to report the incident, she was told to keep quiet, warning that this could affect her asylum claim. And these women had no access to legal aid, no interpreter, no understanding of her rights, therefore. And this is not an isolated case, it is a systemic failure, and we have to respond to such issues. Next slide, please. Therefore, there is a growing, on the one hand, there is a growing recognition at the European level that victim support must be status neutral, that all victims, regardless of migration status, deserve access to justice and care. The revision of the EU Victims' Rights Directive is a real opportunity to embed this principle, and this is something that I'm talking a lot about the EU Victims' Rights Directive. I'm not only focusing on other sectoral legislative files like the anti-trafficking one, the violence against women, not only because the EU Victims' Rights Directive is under revision, but for us, it is a cornerstone legislation that puts the foundation tools for support for all victims. And then we should move on to the specialized agencies and the service provided by them. And alongside, we now have, as I mentioned, the 2024 recast of the EU Anti-Trafficking Directive has been adopted, but we must also be honest. Rights on paper do not equal rights in practice, and there is a gap in implementation. As I said before, there are some barriers regarding reporting, information and communication with victims on how to report, but also lack of referral mechanism and how to navigate the whole referral system. The gap between the EU level standards and the national implementation remains wide, particularly in times of emergency when protections are often deprioritized. And the problem there is that sometimes emergency becomes the rule. And when emergency becomes the rule, then there is no escape. Even if we see some promising development like trauma-informed victim-centric models, calls for safe reporting without fear of immigration consequences, and intersectional approaches that account for gender, age, race, and status. And we would like to stress out that there should be greater acknowledgement of the mental health as a core component of emergency response, not as a secondary service. I'm sure that we all remember these children that have been reported in Lesbos and in Samos being in a limbo state. This limbo state is something that it's a call for our community, but also for our humanity to act. And yeah. And also, we would like to stress out as BSC that stronger recognition should be in place, that emergency systems must also be digital ones, offering multilingual hotlines, online reporting tools, and remote counseling when physical access is sometimes blocked. And in the trafficking context, because I like making these connections, stronger legal obligations around identification, non-punishment of victims, residence permits, and compensation should be promoted. However, we have seen, as I said before, there is fragmentation, national implementation lags, and resources are stretched. Due to funding, there is the current negotiation of the new multi-annual financial framework from the part of the EU institutions. We don't know what it's going to mean when it comes to emergency response, etc. So we should wait a little bit in the end of the year. And I truly believe that these good intentions that all of us have in the policy era, or when we're working with projects or we're trying to advocate for rights of vulnerable people, these good intentions must be matched by operational systems that leave no one behind. And that's why I appreciate a lot the fact that, as it was mentioned before by Laura, that one of the main outcomes and the main results of these policy labs should be the drafting of structured recommendations on specific topics. Next slide. Therefore, in most emergency contexts, responses are built around basic survival, shelter, food, and documentation, but they rarely account for protection from violence or victim support. So this is what is missed at some point. Many services are inaccessible to migrants due to the language barriers, lack of information, fear of police or authorities, lack of trust to the institutions, and this is a problem of our democracies, guys. I mean, it's really important, this lack of trust, not only from people that arrive in our territories, but also from us, because I have been in cases that even case workers are hesitant of advising the person to go to the police and report something, because they still think that the police station is not the safest place to go. in cases of gender-based violence. And there is an example in Greece, a Greek case that everybody, I'm sure, from my country knows about. I'm not going to go into detail, but yes. And also the lack of cultural mediation. There is also lack of coordination, which is something that I preach a lot, between migration and asylum services and victim support. And let's be honest, too much is left to underfunded NGOs who are expected to bridge the systemic gaps without a mandate or the capacity, and when they also need to operate with short-term projects and this whole spectrum of lack of funding. Next slide. And we understand that this whole situation is not sustainable and it is not fair, not only for the people that are involved in the whole response, but also mostly for the people that we're working for. So what should inclusive emergency systems look like? First, they should be trauma-informed and culturally sensitive. Emergency protocols should include access to interpretation and legal aid, clear referral pathways between asylum and victim support systems through the creation of a model system that will create a bigger national framework. Status neutral access to shelters and mental health care, frontline training for police, medical staff and case workers, so that they can understand the indicators of to identify some early signs of violence or need of responding, and they can coordinate the responses and send the people to report the violence that they have been inflicted or the type of support that they need. Also, safe reporting mechanisms are essential. Victims must be able to report these crimes without the fear of being detained or deported. And finally, migrant victims' voices must be included in the design and evaluation of all the emergency responses. It is really important when we are trying to suggest a plan, a framework, whatever it is, or to create a project, to go and talk to the people that the project is going to benefit them. So creation of platforms of beneficiaries and a liaison with them is super important in the conceptualization phase, but also in the design phase, and not only in the implementation. Inclusive systems see the migrant victims not only as people in need, but as people with rights, strength, and agency. And I think that when a migrant victim walks into our office, they are sometimes more afraid of us than of the person who hurt them, because they don't know how to express themselves and what to ask, and how their rights will be let's say appreciated. Our job is to change that, and the support starts with building trust with the community that we are here to support. We live all in an era of overlapping crises, and I mean, I will give the example, and I'm not afraid of speaking my mind here, that what we're living right now with Palestine is a plague in our humanity. And after that, I think that all the emergencies that we have to deal with will not be dealt in the same way. And we should be more outlined, and we should be more active, because climate emergencies, conflict, forced migration, and rising hate will be there in our door, in our neighborhood. And it's not only just to be theoretical and think about what should be a response like, but we have to have a more victim-centric perspective when we're building up our response. Crisis can also be a catalyst for projects. So this is something positive, that I'm trying to see the glass half full and not half empty. As we reimagine emergency response system across Europe, we have a choice. Do we build them to exclude and neglect, or we build these systems in order to see, hear, and support people? Migrant victims of crime have already endured this immense harm, and I hope that all of us can ensure that these systems turn this crisis into an opportunity to offer protection and not more pain. And I have also included some recommendations for inclusive migrant systems later on. So we'll start now with that. So I don't know, because I'm not following the presentation, I don't know, something's going on. No. So what does it actually mean to build inclusive emergency systems for migrant victims of crime? It means embedding the quality, the protection, and the victim support across all layers of the emergency preparedness and response, from local services to EU-level coordination. And this is something that VSC we are trying a lot, because we're trying to mainstream victims' rights in all policy areas, in all DGs, in all specific units of the Commission. This let me offer a structured set of recommendations that combine these both operational improvements and systemic reforms. These recommendations can help the governments, the EU institutions, and the civil society align the policy with the reality, placing at the same time victims at the center of the response and ensuring that there is a long-term integration, not just a temporary survival. So we have to guarantee the status neutral, safe access to protection. Victim support must never be contingent, or let's say must never rely on a person's immigration status. We need safe reporting mechanisms, firewalls to ensure that seeking justice does not lead to detention or deportation, trauma-informed, multilingual access to legal aid, shelters, and care, implementation of all the directives, and ensuring victims are not persecuted for offenses committed as a result of their exploitation. And protection must also extend to undocumented migrants, who are among the least likely to seek help and most exploitation. Then we should, as I said before, this mainstreaming perspective is important. Mainstream rights of victims and equality in emergencies and crisis frameworks. Emergencies cannot be exempt from human rights. We must integrate the revised EU Victim Rights Directive, the Istanbul Convention, all the EU equality strategies on gender, anti-racism, LGBTIQ, disability, international and EU emergency planning. Inclusive policies must be part of the whole preparedness union strategies, not the afterthoughts. And this is something that when the preparedness union strategy was released back in March or February, it was something that we really went to the commissioner, Labib, the commissioner for preparedness and equality, to stress out a lot. Emergency planning must also anticipate the rise of hate crimes and xenophobic violence during crisis, which disproportionately target the migrants. Also, another recommendation from our side is to embed victim support into the EU and the national emergency systems. Systems like the EU Emergency Response Coordination Center, ERCC, here in Iberia, and the Protect EU must include victim support modules, must deploy specialized victim support teams, recognize that emergency relief without protection leaves victims behind, and create some standards for victim support in emergencies. Also, as I mentioned in the beginning, we should develop referral and coordination pathways, coordination between asylum, migration, integration, and victim support services through a system of who does what, SOPs, for instance, clearly define the resource pathways to prevent people from falling through gaps, and cross-border coordination. Crises do not stop at the borders, and victims often move between jurisdictions. We have so many cross-border victims to deal with in Victim Support Europe on a daily basis, and it is something that we have seen that EU-level referral protocols are urgently needed. And also, as another important aspect is to train the frontline responders, we must train police, civil protection, healthcare workers, case managers, social workers on how to identify and support survivors of trafficking, sexual and gender-based violence, hate crimes, LGBTIQ motivated violence, and child protection. With trauma-informed, culturally sensitive, and victims' rights-focused tools. And we must also invest in peer-led training involving migrant survivors as educators or frontline professionals. This is the communication with the communities, as we call it in VSC. Also, we need to lay focus on children and young people, especially unaccompanied minors that face specific risks in this type of crisis. Child-sensitive victim support must be a core part of this emergency preparedness. All these Barnacle-style models in trauma care should be scalable and deployable. And also there is a great importance of working with schools and child protection services and youth organizations that need to be integrated into the emergency systems, as they are often the first to detect abuse or exploitation. So last week, I was participating in another discussion, and we were seeing how important it is for teachers to receive training and to know the early identifiers of human trafficking or exploitation. Also, we need to fund what we value, Too often, NGOs are asked to do everything without the resources, the mandate, or the legal protection to do it well. And we need to resource and recognize NGOs as essential actors in emergency response, but also civil society as an essential tool, an essential partner in democracy building. This means sustainable funding, not just project-based grants. And we also need to ring-fence EU and national crisis funds for shelters, legal aid, and psychosocial care. Funding must support the community-based initiatives, especially those led by migrant refugee communities themselves, who sometimes are often the first responders in practice, and they remain neglected. And also the resilience is important, as I said before, and some recommendation regarding resilience is to start speaking about communication, trust, and solidarity. Governments, national authorities, and institutions must promote the social cohesion, not suspicion. Migrant victims should not only be the recipients of aid, but the shapers of the systems. And thus, by including voices in design, monitoring, and evaluation strengthens not only the services, but democracy. And finally, we must track what works and fix what doesn't, use the disaggregated data to assess inclusion gaps, ensure that migrant victims' perspectives are captured, and develop EU-level monitoring dashboards on victim support in emergencies, ensuring that there is transparency and accountability for affected population across member states. We must not view the victim support as separate from integration. For me and for us here, they are deeply intertwined. And a person who receives recognition, safety, and justice after the victimization is far more likely to feel part of the society that protected them. Inclusive systems are not only more just, they are more effective in promoting long-term integration, stability, and resilience. And I will give a very funny or a very simple example. Integration is not like a dishwasher. You're not putting inside someone and after the end of the program, this person is integrated. Integration is a long-term process and it needs investment. And it cannot happen only through emergency cases. When we create the safe space for migrant victims of crime to heal, participate, and rebuild their lives with dignity, we strengthen our societies. And it's time we stop seeing migrant victims as peripheral to emergency response and integration, and instead place them where they belong, at the center. Let's design these systems that live up to the values of dignity, justice, and human rights for everyone. And if we want these systems that don't just save their lives, but restore dignity, we must design them with empathy, evidence, and equity. Migrant victims already carry invisible scars, and I don't think that we should add new ones through our indifference, silence, or structural neglect. And that inclusive emergency systems are not just a moral imperative. They should be a reflection of what kind of society we want to be. Thank you. I will stay in case you have any questions or want to discuss more.
Thank you, Themis. Thank you so much for your presentation, for all the effort. I think it gave us a totally different view of the topic that we are trying to discuss. And I think for me, the key is that not only victims, but migrants should be the shapers of the policies and should be at the center of every effort. Let me check if we have any questions.
We do have some, indeed, some comments and questions. Thank you, Themis. Indeed, I echo the thank you of bringing this specific point into the discussion, the particular intersectional needs of victims and the extra support needed. We have a comment from Tatiana who is saying it's a very important point, the lack of awareness of frontline and humanitarian actors on crisis-targeted migrants and how this lack of awareness might ultimately lead that these actors unintentionally tolerate or contribute to such crimes because of the lack of awareness. Therefore, is essential to enhance and prepare emergency mechanisms in this regard. And she's sharing some documents that people can access in the chat. And then we have two particular questions. The first one is, In your opinion, FTEMIS, does the new pact address this aspect of protecting victim rights compared to the past, given possible scenarios? Our colleague Mohammed, coordinator of EPICAVI, said given possible scenarios, so how these solidarity mechanisms are addressing this aspect of protecting the victim rights, and also the new proposed screening processes in connection to, for example, with Frontex. And we see the narrative is more towards security, use digital text and no more in democratic values. So that when it comes to the pact, and then there is a second question, I formulate them all for you to address them as you think possible. From Irene from Fundación CEPA in Spain, based on your experience, how is training for frontline professional usually received, especially by the police? For example, you might know case in Greece, in your country. Do they accept to receive such training? There is resistance towards it. If they accept participating in those training sessions, does it then translate into real change, into prevention, perhaps?
Okay, so I will start with the first question. Thank you very much. The new pact, for me, I see that the new pact is also an opportunity that it needs to be implemented well. In Greece, the new pact has already been started implemented since 2019-20 as a test period, let's say. Now we have the adoption. I still believe that it is better to navigate through a specific legislative framework than having nothing. When it comes to victims' rights, there is no specific mention in the Pact on Victims. So this is something that I'm talking about, the whole mainstreaming. We are trying to mainstream the language on victimization, etc., on all the legislative files, and it's something that is missing. And when something is missing from an EU legislative file in the transposition process, things can become much more difficult for the specific target group. So I feel that there is a gap there, yes, of course. And I agree that the narrative is more toward the security and not on democratic values. But I'm sure that there are coming strategies that the Commission is trying to develop. For instance, now there is a revision of the anti-trafficking strategy, a revision of the victims' rights strategy, that all these legislative files that refer to fundamental rights to the justice and home affairs sector, like the Pact, for instance, will be kind of addressed there, and there will be some structural guidelines and some structures for support to the member states in order to implement having a fundamental rights perspective. Currently, yes, solidarity is tested, and we need to see how things will move on. And these solidarity mechanisms are trying to address everything, but at the same time, we still face this lack of support and the lack of protection at the borders, especially through the fast-track procedures. So yeah, I mean, the whole screening process is kind of problematic. Yes, it's very quick, but I'm sure that there are mechanisms that the Commission is trying to deploy in order to assess after 1 year of implementation how things can become better. And it is the role of the civil society. That's why I keep insisting that whenever there is a public consultation or a collection of evidence or feedback on behalf of the Commission, it is a time for not only for us as NGOs, but also for us as citizens to speak up and express our voices. It is the aspect that links justice and home affairs, transport, all the sectors to the democracy. And to the other question, okay, so about the police. So in our case, what we're doing is that we're training CEPOL or other authorities when they're asking for that. And our members are training also frontline staff like police officer. It is a matter of, okay, sometimes we tend to say in the legal world that it's a matter of legal culture. It is a matter also of general culture. How much the ministry or the national authorities that is responsible and governs the police units wants to invest and wants to spend energy, time, and money to train these people. There are very good examples of regions in Spain, for instance, like the Basque Country, that on hate crime and xenophobic violence, they have trained officers, they have trained units, and they support very well the victims. And also there are other bad examples. I'm not gonna point the finger at specific countries, but also, as I said, it depends on how much the government or the authority wants to invest. When we go, what we have seen is that we have seen that police officers are super excited and they accept participating in this training session. And they are trying, even some of them, I remember, for instance, because I participated in a training for some police officers of Garda in Ireland, they still send us some requests or some questions of how to deal with such cases, anonymized, but they still are in touch. So there are bright examples, and I think that small steps are there in order to make the change happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the answers as well. So we will be happy to have you with us in the discussion that's going to follow. And now we go to our third speaker. Valeria, thank you as well for being with us. We have Valeria Mendez de Vigo, who is working in the Advocacy and Partnerships Department of Convive Fundación CEPAIM, Spain. And her presentation is going to be on, emergency mechanisms in Spain, successes, lessons, and future challenges. Thank you so much, Valeria.
Thank you so much, Eleni. Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here in this policy lab on emergency mechanism for migrant integration. I feel really privileged to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And I will try to share my presentation. Let me see. Okay, here we are. Can you see it? Yes?
Yes, it's clear. Yeah, we can see it. If you can turn it into presentation mode. Yeah, and
what about now? Okay.
It's coming with the
yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Great. So thank you very much. As Eleni mentioned before, I will focus on emergency mechanism in Spain, an area where we have had very different recent experiences that allow us to talk about successes, lessons learned, and also the challenges, the many challenges that remain open. I would like to address three significant cases. Firstly, the case of Ukraine, or of the people fleeing from the war of Ukraine and coming to Spain. Secondly, the case of the people coming from Afghanistan to Spain. And thirdly, the situation of the Canary Islands. Those are very different contexts, but when we analyze them together, they give us a clear picture of what we have achieved and what still needs to be improved. Let me start with the case of Ukraine. I have entitled this part of the presentation as Ukraine, an exceptional and innovative response, because we truly believe that it is an example of a very good practice. You will remember that the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 marked the first ever implementation of the Temporary Protection Directive in the European Union. This was mentioned also in the presentation by Georgia. This directive, as you will remember, had remained unused for more than 20 years, but it was activated within days, and it was activated by an unanimous decision of the Europe Council. As Georgia pointed out, this directive also granted to the people fleeing from the war of Ukraine a number of rights, including residence, work permit, and many other social rights. So here, the first essential point stands out, the immediate and clear political will. Firstly, in Brussels, that was essential, and afterwards, of course, in all the European capitals, including Madrid. And it is very obvious that that early political decision allowed for a rapid and very effective response. In Spain, nearly 240,000 people were granted temporary protection status, placing our country among the top European Union hosts. I think we were number 4. It is quite a lot if you take into account the geographical distance between Ukraine and Spain. And of those people, more than 40,000 people were received within the national and protection system. Particularly innovative element or mechanism that I would like to point out was the setup of the creation, what was called CREADE, which are acronym, in fact, for reception, care, and referral centers. And those centers, which were set up in some of the main Spanish citizens like Madrid, Barcelona, Alicante, and Malaga, they acted as one-stop shops where in less than 24 hours and sometimes even almost automatically, people were granted, or they could obtain their legal documentation, they could obtain the relevant information, and they could also obtain the referral to reception resources, including accommodation and other resources if needed. And this was achieved also through the coordination, that is also important, of many different public administration, international organization, social entities, etc. I think this point is relevant because this model of the CREADE represents, in fact, a true innovation in emergency management. It shows how an integrated and user-friendly institutional design can facilitate the arrival and inclusion of thousands of people. And let me stress also something which is important, and it is that the system was managed also in a concerted way with social entities. We as CEPAIM were also part, together with other organizations, of that reception system. Another of the key elements which explained the success of the Ukrainian response is that there was an unprecedented social mobilization in Spain. Families, associations, companies, I mean, everybody was totally involved in welcoming refugees. I would like to point out also the role, because I think it was quite relevant, the role of the association of the Ukrainian diaspora who were already in Spain. They formed a lot of organizations and associations helping the newcomers. And also the role of the media. The media played a very relevant role. The coverage was continuous. It was quite empathetic, and it was focused on the victims' suffering and also on the legitimacy of their protection. And this narrative enforced and social solidarity, and it consolidated also political will. And in addition, I think there's a slide here. Okay, sorry. And in addition, Spain's response went beyond the initial reception. I think one of the data which I would like to point out is that within the first year, around 400,000 people were included into the educational programs, of course, mainly children and young students. And that was also due to the coordination among ministries, administration, and social entities. However, there are quite a lot of challenges regarding the Ukrainian response. One of them is that the temporary protection has been renewed annually, and it will last until March 2027. But this cannot be a permanent solution, and those who cannot return to Ukraine will require a stable and long-term status so that they can rebuild their lives, either in Spain or in the other European lives. And also other challenges which remain have been already mentioned in Georgia's presentation: the access to housing, That's an important challenge, and also to employment, decent jobs, etc. And a very specific challenge is the one faced by women, who were the majority of people coming as refugees. Many women who arrived here alone with young children faced a very specific challenge, which is the balancing of work with childcare. And this shows also that without strong support systems, real integration becomes very difficult. No? So this is why we must move from emergency to long-term policies. So this is the case of Ukraine, that even with its challenges that I've mentioned, and I think they are very, 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 very difficult challenges and obstacles in general terms, and when we compare with other situations, we can say that it has been an example of good practice in many ways. Okay, so the second case that I would like to point out is the case of Afghanistan. After the fall of Kabul in 2021, Spain organized some operations. They were called Antigona 1, 2, and 3, and those operations evacuated more than 4,000 people from Afghanistan to Spain. And a particularly relevant fact is that many of them, 1 out of 3, arrived with an asylum request, which was already processed at origin. In other words, that means that legal and safe pathways were enabled to access international protection. And this is important, and it shows us that even in situations of extreme urgency, as it was the case at hand, it is possible to create mechanisms that guarantee rights without forcing people into irregular or very dangerous routes. And also of those evacuated, more than 2,000 were referred into the asylum system. And once again, this was possible thanks to the coordination of many different entities, like the different ministries involved, the UNHCR, the Spanish Asylum and Refugee Office, and social organizations all working together. However, again, Afghan nationals do face a lot of challenges in Spain. Some of those which are significant are, again, the difficulties accessing to housing, to stable employment, also linguistic and cultural barriers, and in some cases, even the people have left the system and even gone to other countries because of the lack of clear prospects. This reminds us, as a lesson, that evacuation and protection are only the first step, but what really matters is ensuring the conditions for a genuine and lasting inclusion or integration. And the third case is the situation in the Canary Islands. That's also a very, very different context. And to give you a few data, nearly 47,000 people arrived in the Canary Islands during 2024. This is the highest figure in history. And in just the first 2 weeks of January 2025, more than 3,200 people had already arrived. This accounts for approximately 23% of 23 of all irregular entries into Spain during that period. These arrivals are very different than the cases of Ukraine or Afghanistan, where arrivals took place through temporary protection and legal pathways. In the Canary Islands, this is quite the contrary. The routes are, and the arrivals are irregular. The routes are extremely dangerous. I've read recently that it is considered right now one of the most dangerous routes, maybe the most dangerous route in the world. And this, of course, generates also a very different kind of pressure on reception facilities, on public services, and also on local communities. There are emergency devices which foresee generally short stays of 1 to 3 months approximately, but with constant arrivals, they become generally and quickly very much overwhelmed. And the result is, of course, overcrowding and delays in transfers to the mainland. Also, the fact that those are islands, the insular contexts, makes things also more difficult. They make them harder because the islands do not have unlimited capacity, and every spike in arrivals is perceived somehow as immediate territorial pressure. And that also feeds to fragmentation, political tensions, social conflicts. I think that the situation in Canary Island has really provoked an increase of hostility towards migrants in Spain. And here also the media played a relevant role, while in Ukraine, as mentioned before, coverage reinforced social solidarity. In the Canary Island, the dominant narrative has often been marked by terms like chaos, alarm, invasion, wave. And as you can imagine, this type of narrative, this discourse, fosters alarm and contributes to the criminalization of migrants. And the particularly delicate challenge has been also mentioned in Georgia's presentation. It is the arrival of unaccompanied minors. Currently, there are more than 5,000. I think the figure is 5,700 in the island. This figure far exceeds the capacity for the protection system and has required also the activation of a contingency plan. But however, its implementation has revealed also lack of specialized resources and ongoing tensions between the central, the state government and the regional governments. And in short, the Canary Islands show us that without structural planning, without coordination and good understanding between the different administrations, and without a responsible public narrative, emergency ceases to be temporary and becomes somehow a permanent situation, which is the situation, a permanent and chronic situation that we have right now. So just to finish, I would like to end with some lessons and that we have learned from these experiences. In the case of Ukraine and Afghanistan, those experiences show us that when there is political will, when there is institutional coordination and collaboration among different actors, it is possible to deliver a rapid and effective response that respects rights and that enables somehow integration and inclusion. And the Canary Islands, on the other hand, warned us of the risks of improvisation, turning emergency into a chronic condition, and also of fueling narratives that criminalize migrant people. The great challenge for Spain and for Europe is to ensure that emergency mechanisms do not become a permanent state. They must be a gateway to inclusion and not a space of continuous uncertainty. And at CEPAIL, we believe that speed in emergency response must always go hand in hand with long-term integration policies like access to housing, decent employment, education, and above all, a stable and legal framework. Only in this way can emergency truly become the first step towards a more inclusive and cohesive society. So those are the three experiences. And let me thank you very much once again for allowing my participation in this policy lab.
Valeria, thank you so much. I mean, I feel that the examples chosen to show us from Spain depict very clearly the difference also. I mean, the fact that social mobilization and how society sees the people that arrive, third country nationals that arrive to the country, how much they are influenced also by the media coverage. And thank you so much for, sorry for the noise, for stressing this this aspect as well. It's very, very important. And the fact that how emergency can become chronic or permanent, and how the paradox of that. So thank you so much. It's really, really, really nice to hear this point of view as well. I don't know if we have any questions. I don't see anything in the chat. I don't know if our participants would like to make a comment or ask a question to Valeria. I know, unfortunately, Valeria, you will need to go, and we will not have you with us in the second part. If there are no questions, we can take a short break now. And when we come back, we will continue with the breakout rooms. There is a message in the chat from Efthymis. Thank you for this opportunity. He also provides his email because he has to go to another call. So thank you so much, Efthymis, for being with us and for providing your email. Patricia, I don't know if you want to say something. We can go to the break for 15 minutes. Do you want to change?
Yeah, maybe for 10, because I
10
think we're a
minutes.
bit late. So
Okay.
like 10 minutes to grab a coffee, tea, water, refresh a bit, to assimilate all these ideas. Please do not disconnect, just turn off cameras, be back in 10 minutes. We reactivate, then we will go into 2 breakouts, and we will explain you what was next, what the methodology to keep discussing together about this. So see you in 10.
I hope everyone is here. I hope you had some time to get some coffee, tea, water, anything, and to be ready for the next round. So what we are going to do now is actually ask for your input. You are going to help us. So we are going to be split, all of us, into 2 groups, 2 breakout rooms where we will have our discussions. And what we are going to talk about is first about the existing gaps and the existing policies around emergency mechanisms. And then we will try and talk about potential solutions and best practices. And of course, the third and last one will be about recommendations. So based also on the presentations that we saw, on the ideas we heard, and of course the experience that each one of us has. So I think we are ready to be split. We're 26 right now connected, if I see right.
Yes. So I think Marisol, you tell us if we are ready, and shall we be back then at so that we have a good 45 minutes
Okay.
for this, and then
Okay.
we are back to share it
So
what
I
we
will
got.
open all the rooms, so you will move automatically, and I will
Okay.
send you a reminder when it's 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so hopefully everyone's back. And hopefully with some energy still for the last 45 minutes. I think we can start sharing what was discussed in the 2 breakout rooms, in the 2 between the 2 groups. I don't know, Georgia, we do have quite a lot of things to say, but because you were in group number 1, I think you should go first. And
Yes, I can start, and I will encourage my team to add more points in case I have forgotten something. A very central point of our discussion was the lack of national funds, the lack of resources, the lack of interpreters. So the topic of the lack of resources was written with different forms. We spoke a bit about the lack of trained personnel, and we discussed about the lack of professionalism actually that we face in many cases. We discussed that especially when a crisis hit, there are a lot of, in most cases, solidarity movements and individuals that would like to engage themselves in supporting migrants and refugees. However, in most cases, with a lack of support by the state, without the appropriate practical tools. So we discussed a bit about the personal feelings that people have in supporting migrants and refugees without necessarily them being trained or professionals or supported by external actors. We discussed a bit, not that much, about the negative narrative in the media that also our speaker Valeria mentioned, but we said that it's a topic that it is a huge challenge while trying to support migrants, but we recognize that we will have a dedicated session on migration narratives in the future, so we didn't elaborate a lot on this. And we also discussed about the lack of coordination, the lack of, coordinating all the actors that are involved in migrants and refugees support. This interagency collaboration that we discussed also with previous speakers. And we said that a huge part of the problem is that the migrants and refugees are not being consulted, are not in the forefront when policies are shaped. And we discussed later on about this need for a bottom-up approach, and in let's say having a bigger focus on migrant-led organizations, that most of the times there are public discussions with their views and their comments on policies and strategic action plans, but they are not taken into consideration while shaping these policies. We discussed about how more vulnerable populations and people like women, the elderly, children, also victims of trafficking, that it was mentioned before, they are overlooked. They are not specific mentions for their support. So these were the main gaps that we identified. When we discussed about solutions, it was limited in terms of number, but we have a very good practice from coming from Spain, a guide of good practices in the care of migrant children, which has all the conclusions from 50 entities and NGOs, which is the number is really remarkable. We discussed that a good practice that can be also replicated is local coordination hubs and civil society partnerships. And we had, before the time is up, we discussed how a good practice from Greece, this came from a Greek participant, how school can be a first supportive hub for the children, but also for their families, and how municipalities, when it was during the first years of the crisis, many schools and many municipalities tried to support migrant families holistically, not only in terms of their educational integration, but also in other ways like covering basic needs. So in terms of recommendations, I already said about involving the migrant-led organizations in the design of the plans, and also having a serious, I really like that we wrote it that way, a serious bottom-up assessment about the local needs. starting from the frontline workers, the people that actually work with migrants and refugees and people on the move. These were the main ideas, and there was an idea of creating a plan that clarifies and separates the roles of authorities, NGOs, and community groups for all involved parties to be aware of their limitations and their obligations in this process, with the ultimate goal of a better coordination among the relevant actors. So the topic of coordination was really present in our discussion. I don't know, Patricia, if you want to share, if I have forgotten something that we discussed, or other participants wants to share, but these were the main ideas.
Yeah, I think Georgia, you summarized it quite detailed. I don't know if anybody else wants to share, but I'm sure then the next group will complement with some ideas.
Well, the one thing is very, very clear that we were all paying very, very good attention to the speakers, to our speakers, and we listened to what they said, and actually they helped us kind of shaping also what we wanted to say. So from our part, if I can start sharing the things that we discussed concerning, of course, we don't have many great differences. We all move into the same, let's say, environment. When we talked about the challenges and the gap, bureaucracy was mentioned as well. And it's just one word, bureaucracy. And I do know that for all of us, it's something that affects every aspect. Every NGO, civil society organization, private company, when they try to do something, they find, at least in Greece, and I know for some other European countries as well, it's like that they find a wall that they have to collide against. And it takes a lot of patience, and you need to have very good information in order to bypass this bureaucracy. And preparedness, that was mentioned during the speaker's presentation as well, housing shortages, the insufficient funding, the lack of coordination, not only between the state and the civil society organizations, but the lack of coordination among local actors. It's an important challenge. As you can see, I don't know if you can see the screen, the shift of political winds. This is something that we think it's very, very important, the way that it was put by the speaker earlier. We can all understand how political wills affect all of us working in the field. Whether you're just a simple, expert in the field, whether you're an NGO or a civil society organization, and whether we like it or not, or we agree or not, we are influenced and affected by the political winds that change. Another thing that it was mentioned in our group is that we have a lot of short-term framing concerning the integration policies, and this affects sustainability. And this is something that's very important. And the lack of community involvement in general, I would say also, this is something that was mentioned from your group as well, the lack of the immigrant, the migration community as well is an important gap. If we go back to the housing, sometimes when it's available or when it is provided, it is of very poor quality. And sometimes it can be also dangerous for people that live there. The migrants' needs they are very, very often forgotten, and they're not taken into consideration when policies and services are designed. There are a lot of negative narratives concerning migration, and whether it's media, whether it's from the state, and this affects, as we also saw from Valeria's presentation, very much how society sees migrants. Also, what we came up with is that participation is not encouraged when conceiving ways of emergency responses. So this must also, in my point of view, must be overcome. There is a serious restriction of personal initiatives. This can also be linked with bureaucracy and with the lack of coordination. I think it's a chain that one part affects all the others. The municipality departments are not taking the lead, and I would add this because this is not my comment. They cannot sometimes, depending on the way that each country functions. Sometimes municipalities do not have the power to do a lot of things. Other times they do have the power, but they lack the will. So this could, because we've seen good practices and we've seen good examples when municipalities in a more local, let's say, environment, they can provide very important solutions and very important services to migrants. Lack of flexibility as well. It's an important challenge. The lack of cooperation, as I mentioned before, between the state and regional actors. So we try also to think of the more local solution, and also the inability to activate the partnership and the cooperation between public and private sector. In Greece, at least, this is very important. I think that when we talk about the gaps and the challenges, these were the most important ones we mentioned. I don't know if anyone from my group would like to add something. And we can talk about it when we finish as well. Going back to the good practices, what we talked about is that we've seen buildings changing their purpose, repurposing of buildings, and I found this very, very positive and a very good remark, a very good comment. The housing in Germany that was mentioned, that works pretty well, and it's provided to everyone by the law. I wish this was happening in Southern Europe as well. We do have examples of good cooperation between local NGOs and municipalities in order to provide additional services, additional accommodation. The private sector is important. So I really hope that in some cases it happens. We need also, when we have the good, how can I say, the balance between addressing emergency and immediate needs with long-term integration, we've seen that this works very, very well. And when NGOs respond to migrants' needs, other kind of very good examples that happen in practice. Another example taken from Greece, I don't know if it's true in other countries as well, that sometimes NGOs are very innovative. And I know for sure that the guardianship program in Greece, it was started by an NGO and then it was taken by the state. So we try to find the positive aspect in all of this. Municipal integration centers also were mentioned in this question that are provided by law in the federal state of North Rhine-Westphalia. Again, Germany, I think it's a pilot country in good in good practices in migration inclusion. I think these were the most of it for question number 2 and about good practices. And if we go to the last one, to the recommendations, as you can see, we do have a lot of recommendations to offer. And one of these is to make sure to gather data from the experience. Not only the proposal here is from the user experience, I would also add from the experience also from the service providers. It's very important. It's also very important to have intersectional approach, also to for the states and the cities, them in a more local context, to adopt the models locally, try to adapt them actually, to create reception systems that last more time, and it's not just for a year or so, to focus not only on immediate needs, but to create programs that foster long-term mechanisms of integration and inclusion, to implement digital systems that track arrivals and match needs with services. That would be, I think, ideal. To address specific directives to protect those in vulnerable states in all aspects of integration systems. What else? To share local best practices along across EU municipalities. And what I mentioned when we were talking about this is that actually our project, EPICA project, is a very good example of it, because we started by sharing our good practices, and then we are learning from each other's good practices. Simplify the procedures when it comes to the recognition of professional qualifications and skills of migrants. And this is a very, very big gap. I know especially in Greece that we have migrants with high qualifications as far as their educational background and their professional background is concerned, and there's absolutely no way for them to recognize them. Also to try to engage local businesses in order to offer employment and trainings to migrants. And to start seeing the newcomers as something more than consumers of support. Now, this is a long talk and long discussion of how humanitarian aid has become something in fashion, and we need to try and change this. Put the user's experience, of course, into practice. Involve cultural mediators more, I would say, and to give them a more robust role in shaping local designs and local plans as far as the integration is concerned, because they know best. And establish structured volunteer programs as well, in order to be able to pair the newcomers with local mentors. And finally, I would also include the building of networks between the different stakeholders. Again, I'm very happy to see that a lot of the suggestions and the recommendations, we've been doing it actually in practice in the EPICA project. I don't know, the people from group number 2, if you would like to add something, if you would like to comment, feel free.
I think you explained everything very well, so nothing to add.
Thank you, Marga. Thank you so much. Thank you. I think we put a lot of good ideas there. I don't know, hopefully it will help in the next step. That's going to be the briefing recommendations, following, of course, the next round of consultations that we are going to do, as Georgia mentioned at the beginning, and the other 2 policy labs that we are about to organize. I don't know, Mohammed, are you still here? Would you like to say a few words? Do you want me? to do it.
Yeah, but maybe just a big thank you before another train of cough come out. But yeah, I just wanted to thank our great researcher Georgia for the amazing work and analysis. It's really nice to see the results after all the desk research and all the data collection and so on. I'm really just on behalf of all Epica partners, we are really proud of these results and it's really nice. Let's hope that we can build up in this analysis. Thanks for you, Eleni, Laura, and Patricia, Marisol for all the technical support and the amazing organization. So maybe just to say that we are already now in the midterm in our lifetime of the project. So far, it's really nice to see all of these outcomes. We did really nice like researching component, we did capacity building, we did some field visits, we learned from each others, and this is all really cumulative to build up in the next half of the project, let's say. So thanks again, and looking forward for the next policy labs. The next one that we're already now foreseen, we have the title so far, we have the dates, so it will be in March 2026 in person in Brussels. This is just to informal information so far. And yeah, thank you again very much, and looking forward. And thanks again also for those who, just as an opportunity to thank those who was part of the consultations, migration policy groups and the others. It was really interesting to have all of this insights from different stakeholders and the speakers of today. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed. I know it was difficult for you today, so thank you for being here and thank you for being active and sharing your thoughts. From our part, a very, very big thank you to all of you for being here, for participating, for sharing your thoughts and your ideas and your comments. It's very important. It's very important for us. I do think that today's Policy Lab was very successful, and we got the insight of experts and the insight from us. Among us, we had a good talks, good discussions, and I really look forward to the next ones. And of course, we will let you know as soon as possible as we have more information and more details about the exact dates and everything. And we will be very happy to see you there again. That's it from me. Patricia, I don't know if there's anything else I've forgotten maybe, or anything else you would like to add.
No, I just echo the thank you and to you, Laura and Georgia, for guiding us, for pitching at our brains. Food for thoughts. We will be informing, as you said, what's next after this. We will be posting summaries, key points from this session. Then, as Georgia said, probably early next year, later on spring, I think we will have the final recommendations. So this is something that we will be captured in that document, and that we will do our best to spread the word and to advocate for the content that is coming into those recommendations, so that hopefully the more local realities that we are bringing here from all different actors are embedded into future policies. Now we are in this moment, next multi-annual financial framework discussion, next the EU Pact implementation. So it's really a good time to raise our voice and to advocate for this.
Exactly. So thank you all for being here, and we will see you again very, very soon.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you for everything.